Your support matters. With 90% of our viewers yet to subscribe, we need your help to keep creating engaging content. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Let us know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below. I never thought I would find myself here, standing on the edge of a life I had built so carefully, questioning everything I had once believed immutable. My marriage, my home, my role as a wife, a mother, and a trusted member of a close-knit family, these were the pillars upon which I had constructed my existence. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, a quiet ache had begun to grow, creeping through the cracks of my heart like ivy on an ancient wall. I told myself it was nothing, a fleeting restlessness born of routine. But deep down, I knew better. It began during a family gathering, one of those summer afternoons that stretched lazily into evening, where laughter and conversation mingled with the scent of grilled food and the hum of cicadas. Our families had always been intertwined, bound not just by blood, but by shared traditions, by holidays spent together, by the unspoken understanding that family meant everything. Among the familiar faces was one that had always been present, but had never drawn my attention quite like it did that day. Ethan was my husband's cousin, and though we had grown up attending the same family events, I had thought of him as little more than a faint presence in the background of my life. He was quiet, reserved, the kind of person who preferred the outskirts of a crowded room to its center. But that summer, something about him seemed different. Or perhaps it was I who had changed. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft shade of lavender, we found ourselves sitting together on the porch, away from the noise of the gathering. Our conversation began as it always had, with polite inquiries and shared memories of past family reunions. But somewhere along the way, it shifted. There was an ease to our exchange that surprised me, a depth to his words that resonated in ways I hadn't expected. He spoke of his dreams, his struggles, his desire to find meaning in a world that often felt hollow. I listened, captivated not just by his words, but by the way he made me feel, seen, understood, in a way that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, a spark, a tremor, a quiet stirring in the depths of my heart, and it terrified me. In the days that followed, I tried to push the memory of that evening aside, to bury it beneath the weight of my responsibilities. But Ethan lingered in my thoughts, like the melody of a song I couldn't quite forget. I told myself it was nothing more than a momentary lapse, a flicker of connection that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. After all, I loved my husband. Daniel was a good man, kind, dependable, the sort of partner many women would envy. We had built a life together, a life filled with shared dreams and quiet contentment. But as much as I tried to focus on all the reasons why my heart should remain steadfast, I couldn't deny the growing distance between us. Marriage, I had learned, was not the fairy tale I had once imagined. It was not a constant rush of passion or an unending stream of happiness. It was compromise, routine, the slow weaving of two lives into one. And somewhere along the way, in the midst of raising children and paying bills and navigating the mundane realities of adulthood, the spark between Daniel and me had dimmed. We still loved each other. I was certain of that. But it was a love that had grown comfortable, predictable, and, if I was honest, a little stagnant. Ethan, with his quiet intensity and thoughtful gaze, felt like an echo of something I had lost, a reminder of the person I used to be before life became so heavy. Our interactions remained innocent at first. A shared smile across the room at another family gathering, a brief conversation in the kitchen while the others were occupied. but each moment felt charged, as if the air between us crackled with unspoken words. I told myself it was harmless, that I was reading too much into things. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, I found myself seeking him out, drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just his presence that captivated me, it was the way he seemed to see through the facade I wore, to the restless, yearning soul beneath. I remember the first time our connection crossed the line from innocent to something more. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air smells of fallen leaves and the sky is a canvas of stars. We had gathered at my in law's home for a family dinner, and as the night wore on, I stepped outside for a moment of solitude. I found Ethan there, leaning against the porch railing, his breath visible in the cool night air. We talked as we always did, but this time there was a weight to our words, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life, I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. Like I'm just going through the motions, but I'm not really a living. Ethan didn't respond right away. He turned his gaze to the horizon, his expression thoughtful. I know what you mean, he said finally. Sometimes I wonder if this is all there is, just existing, instead of really being alive. His words struck a chord deep within me, and for a moment, we simply stood there in silence. The unspoken understanding between us more powerful than anything we could have said. When he finally turned to look at me, his eyes held a mixture of sadness and something else. Something that made my heart skip a beat. In that moment, I knew we were standing on the precipice of something that could change everything. When the cracks in your life begin to show, they don't do so all at once. They form quietly, in the shadows of your routines, creeping into your soul like water seeping through stone. The weight of my choices, those stolen moments, whispers in the dark, and the growing chasm of guilt, had finally settled into every fiber of my being. I thought I could bear it. I thought I could live two lives, balancing the person I was with the person I had become. But the truth has a way of finding its voice, even when you try to silence it. The morning after my meeting with Ethan in the park, the world felt heavier. The decision to end our connection should have brought me relief, perhaps even closure. But instead, it left a hollow ache that I couldn't ignore. The realization that I would have to face my husband, Daniel, with the truth was a weight I was not yet ready to carry. I had always prided myself on being strong, on being the kind of person who could weather any storm. But this storm was of my own making, and the destruction it would leave behind terrified me. I spent the next few days in a haze of self-reflection, questioning how I had let things spiral so far out of control. I replayed every moment of our marriage in my mind, searching for the points where we had faltered, where we had allowed the silence to grow between us. Daniel had always been my rock, a steady, dependable presence in my life. He wasn't the type to shower me with grand gestures or declarations of love, but his devotion was evident in the little things. The way he brewed my coffee, just the way I liked it every morning, the way he held my hand during difficult times, the quiet assurance in his voice that made me believe everything would be okay. And yet, somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing him. I had stopped listening. As I sat at the kitchen table late one evening, the house silent save for the soft hum of the refrigerator, I knew I couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. The guilt was eating me alive, and every time I looked into his eyes, I felt like a fraud. He deserved to know, no matter how much it would hurt him. But how do you tell the person you love that you've betrayed them? How do you find the words to shatter their world? When I finally gathered the courage to speak, it was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The kids were out with friends, the house bathed in the soft golden light of late autumn. Daniel was sitting in the living room, reading a book, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. It was such a familiar, comforting scene that for a moment, I almost convinced myself to walk away, to let the moment pass and keep my secret buried. But then he looked up at me, his expression soft and loving, and I knew I couldn't hide any longer. Daniel, I began, my voice trembling. Can we talk? He set the book down, a faint crease forming between his brows. Of course, he said, his tone calm but curious. What's on your mind? I sat down across from him, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. The words I had rehearsed 100 times in my mind suddenly felt inadequate, small in the face of the truth I was about to reveal. I need to tell you something, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Something I should have told you a long time ago. His eyes searched mine, and I could see the flicker of concern, the faint hint of unease. Okay, he said slowly. I'm listening. And so I told him. I told him about the growing distance between us, the loneliness that had crept into our marriage, and the way I had allowed myself to seek solace in someone else. I told him about Ethan, how it had started, how it had grown, and how I had ended it. I didn't sugarcoat the truth or try to justify my actions. I simply laid it all out before him, raw and unfiltered, my voice breaking under the weight of my confession. When I finished, the silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at me, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. I could see the pain in his eyes, the betrayal, but also the effort it took for him to hold himself together. He didn't yell or lash out. He simply sat there, absorbing the weight of my words. How long? He asked finally, his voice low and strained. How long has this been going on? Months, I admitted, my voice trembling. But it's over now. I ended it. I swear to you, Daniel, I never meant to hurt you. Stop, he said, holding up a hand. Just stop. The look in his eyes broke me. It was a mixture of anger, sadness, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as if trying to make sense of what he had just heard. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him how sorry I was, but I knew that nothing I said could undo the damage I had done. I need some time, he said finally, his voice tight. I need to think. And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of my guilt. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our home was thick with tension. Daniel was distant, his conversations with me short and perfunctory. He threw himself into work, spending long hours at the office and coming home late. When he was home, he avoided me, retreating to the study or the bedroom without a word. The silence between us, once a quiet comfort, now felt like a chasm I couldn't cross. I wanted to reach out to him, to beg for his forgiveness, but I didn't know how. I'd broken something between us, something fragile and precious, and I didn't know if it could ever be mended. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, he walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest. For a moment, he simply watched me, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said finally, his voice steady but firm. I nodded, setting the dish I was holding back in the sink. Okay. He gestured toward the dining table, and we sat down across from each other. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words, the silence stretching on until he finally broke it. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, he began, his voice measured. And I need to know why. Why wasn't I enough for you? His question cut deep, and tears filled my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. It wasn't about you not being enough, I said finally, my voice cracking. It was about me. I felt lost, disconnected. And instead of talking to you about how I was feeling, I made the worst mistake of my life. I let myself believe that what I was missing was something you couldn't give me, when the truth is, I never gave you the chance. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I'm not saying I'm blameless, he said. I know I've been distant at times. I know I've taken you for granted. But I never imagined you would turn to someone else. I'm so sorry, Daniel, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right.